Hello everyone!
Welcome to our channel.
I'm Hermia and I'm largely a Neo-Marxist. The defining features of the Neo-Marxist economics are labor theory of value and the concept of exploitation.
Hi, I'm Sean. I'm mainly a follower of Neo-Liberalism. This means that we value free markets and free trades, and we almost apply them to every market.
Today we'll be talking about minimum wage, which is the lowest legal value that employers can pay to the employees.
Recently, minimum wage has a lot of relevance. This is because Democrats, mostly Senator Bernie Sanders, introduced a bill to increase the minimum wage. He wants to increase in minimum wage by $1 or $1.50 each year. This will increase to a minimum wage of $15 by 2025. But Hermia, I don't think that minimum wage should exist at all because it causes higher unemployment.
But why?
Well, first of all, we have to know that employment comes from the factor market, in this case, labor. A factor market is basically governed by a supply and demand. The demand is basically the employers employing workers to work for them, and the supply is basically employees. Now, the supply and demand comes together to form an equilibrium, and this equilibrium is largely governed by the marginal revenue product of the worker. The marginal revenue product is basically the marginal product of the worker, which is the production times the price of each good. Now, what justifies this wage is that it is an equilibrium between the supply and demand, reflecting the worker's productivity. Thus, if there is a minimum wage that is higher than this equilibrium, higher than the worker's marginal revenue product, then this worker will be laid off. Thus, minimum wage, essentially a price floor, causes a higher unemployment rate.
But hold on, why do you assume that the wage is equal to the MRP that the worker produces? In the real world, the capitalists have only to pay the substance wage instead of the MRP, and the surplus value, which is the difference between MRP and the wages, is obtained by the capitalist.
But wait, where does this difference between the wage and the MRP come from? There's always competition and demand for workers in the market. This means that if we take an example of an employer who's trying to extract this difference, there's always going to be an employer that's willing to extract less of a difference, that's going to offer the worker more or closer to his marginal revenue product. If we extend this example, then the difference between the wage and the marginal revenue product will gradually decrease to a close to zero or very small value. Thus, when you think about it, this difference doesn't exist.
But notice that there is an asymmetric information in the labor market. The information about the workers' MRP is held by the entrepreneurs, and they have ample incentive to understate the workers' value. So the demand curve in the labor market is generally lower than the workers' real MRP.
But even if some capitalists understate the workers' marginal revenue product, this still doesn't contradict the argument of competition. There's always going to be some capitalists that are willing to pay the workers more wage. Now, even if there is a difference between the workers' MRP and the wage, this difference will go to the capitalist's profit. And this profit is justified because this is a return to their capital and also for their organizational effort.
But now again, you're assuming a perfectly competitive market. The labor market, in fact, is really imperfect, not only because of the high frictional cost of unemployment to individuals, but also because the job vacancy at a specific period is rather limited. So when we view the labor market reversely, with employers applying the job vacancy, they actually have a lot of market power because the individuals would sacrifice part of the deserved wage in return of getting a job, so that employees will voluntarily accept a lower wage.
Okay, I think there are two fundamental differences between our two frameworks. The first is that we have different estimations of the gap between the wage and the MRP. And the second is that we estimate the marginal revenue product of each worker differently. Now addressing our first fundamental problem, the difference between the wage and marginal revenue product of a worker. Under my framework, the difference between workers' wage and marginal revenue product is extremely small. Thus, implementing a minimum wage would go above the marginal revenue product, which is the amount that the employer is willing to pay the worker. In this case, because the minimum wage is higher than the MRP, this worker will become unemployed.
But this model assumes that the gap between the MRP and the wage is so large that we can legally impose a minimum wage. And this minimum wage will force the actual wage to go up. Well, this will not cause any additional unemployment because the MRP, which is the benefit brought to the company of an additional worker, is still larger than the wage paid to the worker. The magnitude of the gap between the MRP and the wages is different in different industries. Now, if we impose a universal minimum wage, this is what will happen.
Okay, so if we take 3 examples of industries, we can see that the first industry, there is a large difference between the wage and the marginal revenue product. Thus, implementing a minimum wage would cause the wages of the workers to increase, decreasing the difference. In the second case, there is no effect because the minimum wage is already lower than the previous wage. In the third industry, because the minimum wage is higher than the marginal revenue product of the average worker, it is going to increase the unemployment rate in industry 3. Thus, because minimum wage and the difference between the wage and the marginal revenue product differs between different industries and individuals, minimum wage policies can only be effectively and practically implemented in a very small scale. Okay, now addressing our second fundamental difference. According to neoliberalism, the only way that we can calculate marginal revenue product of a worker is by the wage. The capitalist will pay the workers according to their productivity.
But it can be also argued that the marginal revenue product is independent from wage. Instead, it is deduced from the function of production, which relies on the state of capital, resources, and management.
Now, utilizing our 2 fundamental differences, if we know how to calculate the marginal revenue product, utilizing our aforementioned wage and marginal revenue product model, we can implement a minimum wage on a very small scale. However, this bill to implement a universal minimum wage is very difficult and thus up for more discussion.
So guys, that's the end of our video. Please like, subscribe, and comment down below. We know it's a very controversial topic, so please be civil.
Also, if you would like to hear us cover other topics or news stories, please also let us know down in the comment section.
Hello everyone.
Welcome to our channel. Okay, I think there are 2 fundamental differences between our 2 frameworks of this thing. Okay, so addressing our second fundamental difference. According to neoliberalism, the marginal